Raider Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Raiders NFL Draft Podcast alongside former NFL scout and former Raider Bucky Brooks. I am Rhett Lewis and excited to be here with you as we start to now let the dust settle on free agency a little bit, a time to fill needs. Whereas what we talk about over the course of the next 6 weeks, the draft, a time to build your team, right? With good football players, best available is always what's on the docket. And so in free agency, it's a chance to kind of plug some of those holes and figure out some things. And for the Raiders, Bucky, this really started with a bang, like potentially cornerstone type of players on the offensive and the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, keeping Maxx Crosby in the fold was huge with that contract extension, probably allowed some of the other dominoes to fall into place, Buck, and then bring in Geno Smith in via trade. Let's assess Maxx Crosby first. I mean, Mr. Silver and Black, right? And you got to feel good about that.
Yeah, you got to feel good about that. And what you do is you're sending the message to the locker room that if you are a good player and a good locker room leader, we're going to take care of you. And when you just think about the history of the Raiders, and so many people have taken this saying, but it used to always be once a Raider, always a Raider. And that's what it's about. And so Maxx Crosby has certainly put pelts on the wall. He has earned the respect of the Raiders inside and outside the building. You think about Raider Nation and how he's adored. Look, he deserves to get it. And when you go to the field and watch him play, you won't find anyone that plays as hard as he does. And you won't find anyone who is more impactful with his energy, effort, and execution of pass rushing techniques. I mean, he's a dominant player. And look, man, let's be glad that he got the deal done when he did, because Myles Garrett came right after him.
That's right.
and sent the
another bag.
Through the stratosphere. Hats off to the Raiders being proactive to get this done. And look, man, kudos to Maxx Crosby for all the work that he's done since entering the league coming out of Eastern Michigan.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you're talking about the intersection of talent, of technical skills, and of effort, Maxx Crosby is standing right in the dang middle of the street. And that's what you love right there. And obviously a shining example of what it means to be a Raider. And then, you bring in Geno Smith and reunite him with Pete Carroll, where Geno rejuvenated his career and became one of the best, signal callers and one of the best quarterbacks, in the league during his time in Seattle. And I just think, like, to me, when I look at this, from a organizational standpoint, like, you are telling this team, we are going to win right now, and we are not wasting any time. That's what that move signals to me, as opposed to bringing in, a player. And look, and this is part of the conversation too. Look, I don't know if it necessarily takes a quarterback off the board at 6 overall, if the right one is there, but it allows your team to compete right this second.
Yeah, it allows your team to compete right this second. And what it does is, Rhett, a lot of great executives would do this. Like, you want to have a team that if we had to put the ball down and line up and play, we could line up and play. Geno Smith gives them a quarterback that they can line up and play with. Geno also gives them a veteran quarterback that if they have to play the next 2 years, they could. That enables the Las Vegas Raiders now to enter the draft being able to confidently say, we're going to take the best player available at this pick. So if something happens weird at the top where Travis Hunter's available, cool, we can take him. If it's so that, hey, one of the quarterbacks are available, yeah, we can take him if we want him, but maybe there's another position that we want. If Ashton Jeanty is there and we decide that we want to make sure that we have a feature back based on Pete Carroll's history and the history of the Raiders of late when they have a dominant running back in the backfield, boom, let's get the Boise State standout. This is about making sure that on draft day, you can do what's in the best interest of the franchise without being beholden to the needs, particularly at the top of the board.
And I think that's a good point. And that's obviously what we're trying to ascertain now, right? With these free agent signings. It's like, okay, sign Geno Smith. What does that do for the potential of a quarterback at 6? And as you mentioned, like, that's what it allows. It allows you flexibility, right? It allows you to feel good about not having to take one right there. You never want to really be in that situation where you're in that gotta have it mode. But it also paints a little bit of a picture towards, the future in terms of quarterbacks coming down the pipe, probably a little bit more highly regarded in terms of overall class depth once you get beyond this year. And that's, again, what you're allowing yourself to kind of take part in. So now, as you look at the way that you're shaping this team, you go back and you look at the rest of, some of these these moves that have been made for the Raiders. And I think about a player like Alex Kappa, that again, like Geno Smith, has familiarity with this new era of Raider Nation. John Spytek and company drafted him when he was there in Tampa, then went on to sign a big deal in Cincinnati. He gets released there, and felt like within minutes he becomes a Raider
right away.
And then you look at some of the other priorities. Getting Malcolm Kuntz back
Yes.
on a 1-year, $12 million deal. Again, now you're feeling really good about where you're at on the edges, as long as Malcolm, is healthy and can continue that trajectory that he was on. If you're talking about needs, it kind of takes the edge portion, maybe off the man. I feel like we got to go get a player in the draft at the edge. Now you could still do it, but again, releases some of the pressure a little bit.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that you want to do. You want to release the pressure so you can make sound decisions based on the board and not the emotional pull of, man, we need to have this position, so I'm going to manufacture this grade to make sure that we get this position filled. Malcolm Kuntz to play alongside Maxx Crosby. Think about Christian Wilkins coming back. Like, they now have a very formidable
Tyree still there. Yep.
Tyree still there. You're hoping that, hey, it finally clicks for him this year.
Yep.
Now it's about, hey, okay, how can we support the guys up front? You lost a terrific middle linebacker in Robert Spillane. Like, some of these things can be addressed via draft or whatever, but how does Pete Carroll envision his team playing, and what are the types of players that they need to bring into the locker room to not only help the team from a performance standpoint, but who's going to be the leaders, who's going to be the guys to hold everyone accountable so we can raise the standards in Las Vegas.
Sure. Yeah, and look, Adam Butler re-signed again, another nice piece along the defensive front, a 3-year deal worth $16.5 million, according to Ian Rappaport. And then you talked about Spillane, Trayvon Merrick also exiting via free agency, got a real nice deal. And I don't know if it's 1-for-1, but the Raiders do go try and plug those holes, right? Mm-hmm. Landon Roberts comes in on a 1-year reasonable deal at $3 million. Jeremy Chin, who had a nice run with the Washington Commanders after leaving the Carolina Panthers, 2-year deal worth about $16 million. Again, you're getting similar skill set at a price that maybe fits your picture of what that position is worth a little bit more reasonably. And obviously, you say thank you and wish them well, Merrick and Spillane and those who left. But it feels like you're finding ways to, I don't want to say recoup those losses, but plug those holes and then still give you opportunities to improve those positions again via the draft. But this to me feels like a great setup for what we're going to see in Green Bay, kind of across the board as you look at the comings and goings.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a great setup. And Rhett, these are two different things. Like, free agency and the draft, look, they work independently, but they still require the executive to work collectively to make sure that the team is built the right way. What you do before we even get into the free agent process is you have these personnel staff-wide meetings where we talk about, here are the strengths of free agency, here are the needs that we potentially can fit in free agency because the depth of the free agent market is on this side of the ball or at this position. In the draft, college director will say the same thing. Here's the draft. Here's an overview. Here are the strong points. Here are the weak points. And then you try and cross-reference, okay, well, if they're strong in free agency with the lineman, but weak in the draft, I'm going to have to commit big dollars in free agency to get me someone that can rush the passer. And if it's, in reverse, then you'll say, hey, we're going to cast our eyes on the draft to handle some of these things. But before you can settle on those things, you got to make sure that the core of your squad is intact so that, no matter what, we know where our floor is right here. Now we're trying to improve wherever we can, but at least we know we can line up and play with this team right here and we can be okay.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point. Now, I think there's probably some curiosity, from Raider Nation out there about, what this offense is going to look like. We've talked about that before when talking about Pete Carroll's hire here in Las Vegas and what he's won with before. And obviously you have an emphasis on a physical run game. And, now you're kind of looking out there and didn't see, a big splash made on the running back market here from the Raiders. Obviously, still have Zamir White under contract, Dylan Laube, and Sincere McCormick as well. Is this a spot now where you could maybe see a second wave of free agency? A guy like J.K. Dobbins, who's out there looking for a new deal after a year under Jim Harbaugh in L.A., or does this really open up the possibility to start talking about a running back in the draft as early as number 6?
Look, I think you're doing a disservice to the team if you don't at least have the discussion about
Yeah.
Jeanty at 6.
Yeah.
When you rate the player is terrific. You saw him dominate competition in the Mountain West. You see his impact playmaking ability as a runner and also as a pass catcher out the backfield. When you go back, and I made the comparison early in the process that he reminds me a lot of Josh Jacobs. When I think about what Josh Jacobs did to the franchise, man, he was a guy that was a dominant playmaker for the Silver and Black. If you feel so strongly that the guy will not only come in and start, but come in and play at a Pro Bowl level, pull the trigger. No matter what all the skeptics may say about the running back, at the end of the day, if the running back puts up numbers, helps you control the game, he has helped you do your job, and he's been a part of a winning blueprint that is sustainable, particularly down the stretch.
Yeah. Okay. The next, and like, I think that's such an interesting one. And I know, we don't often see running backs go that high, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to say, Ezekiel Elliott was a top 5 pick of the Cowboys. Obviously, Bijan Robinson went top 10 to the Falcons and is, kind of proved them right. Jeanty feels like that type of talent, right? Obviously, the extreme production at Boise State,
Mm-hmm.
and you talk to folks there at Boise. I mean, I talked to his head coach, Spencer Danielson, and you're talking about a player that changed a program. You're talking about a player that was the leader of the program. You're talking about a player who in spring practice, leaving one of the practices, went up to the head coach and was like, "Coach, I need a minute with the team. This level of play today was not up to our standard. We need to get this corrected or this is going to snowball." We have that. When your best players are your best leaders, your best workers. Peyton Manning talks about that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Good teams have their best players as their best leaders, their best workers, the guys that you can point to as the shining example of how we want it to be done. Jeanty checks all the boxes, man. So if you're sitting there saying, God, running back value at 6, man, it doesn't add up for us. Well, this isn't your everyday run of the mill running back, right? This is a player that can not only be a change agent on the field, but a culture enforcer and builder for Pete Carroll to kind of have as one of those foundational pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. And the leadership piece is critical. When you go back and think about the best teams that Pete Carroll had in Seattle, those player-led teams, people will talk about the Legion of Boom and how the defense was so dominant. But they were dominant because, man, they held each other accountable. They weren't afraid to have hard conversations to get things right and move past it. And some of that bled into, the relationship with the offense and how they did it. But Pete Carroll wants to play complementary ball. He wants a team that can dominate on defense, and he wants to run the ball to control the game. When the Seattle Seahawks were rolling, and this is when people were begging and clamoring for Russ to cook, they were running the ball over 50% of the time. There's a 3-year window where they led the league in rushing attempts because that's how they wanted to get down, particularly with beast mode in the backfield. To me, Pete Carroll believes in that style. Geno Smith has had success as the quarterback within an offense that featured that style. They're going to get to that. It's a matter of, are they going to get to it at 6? Are they going to get to it in the second round? But there's going to be a bell cow back that comes on board.
Yeah, let's play that scenario out for a second. Let's say 6, isn't the way we're going to run it, right? And gonna find maybe a player in the trenches, offensive, defensive line. There'll be terrific defensive tackles, edge rushers there. If you want to continue to reinforce a position of strength, which again, GM John Spytek said, yeah, look, we get the Eagles model, right? I ran that model in Tampa as well, and so we'll keep piling on the resources there because at some point you're going to have turnover and you'd like to be in a position to say it's time for next man up. But let's play that running back scenario out. And let's say, it's not Jeanty at 6. Let's move into the second round. There, I feel like we start to get into the conversation about Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State. I feel like you start to get into the conversation of, does TreVeyon Henderson end up going back into the first round because of his home run ability? Are you talking about Caleb Johnson from Iowa? A guy who would fit more of a zone scheme type of running outfit at this point, based off what we saw from him at Iowa. I think you're starting to look into the Dylan Sampsons at Tennessee.
Explosive.
Other guys like that. there's value there if you pass on it in the first round, obviously.
Yeah, there's value there. And ultimately, the conversation that you will have at 6 is Ashton, Jeanty versus the board. What
Right.
other player on the board is a higher graded prospect than Jeanty? If it's close, man, we can take the running back. If it's not close, where there's a significantly more or less margin, it tells you everything that you need to know right then. I know people get caught up on running back and positional value,
Yeah.
but when you really look at it, look, man, you can't pay enough for a great running back based on how they impact the game. I look at Saquon, his impact on the Eagles,
Oh
Derrick
my gosh.
Henry,
Yeah.
his impact on the Baltimore Ravens, and even to a lesser extent, Josh Jacobs' impact on the Green Bay Packers. When you have a marquee running back, it sets the table for everything that you want to do as a passing game, but then you got to have the passes and pass
Right.
catches to make it happen.
Yeah, and just to take that a step further, you mentioned Saquon. Obviously, I don't think the talent is necessarily comparable with Saquon and Ashton Jeanty, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like Genty's a special player; he's not a Saquon player, in my estimation. And look, there's not a lot of guys out there who are. So let's not hold that against him here. But I think when you look at it, in hindsight, you take a running back at 6. Let's say he ends up being a 1,200-yard player for you, for five years until you start debating, the next contract.
Yeah.
Do you care whether? Hold on. Do you care whether you took him at 6 or you took him at 16? Like, does it matter if he's that type of player for you?
No, I'm a player, man. Take good players when you can get them.
Yeah.
Don't get cute. Don't try and win what we call like the analysis of the nerds who are talking about like, oh, you could have had him here and there. Man, get good players that can impact the team and do what you need to do to bring them on the team. And we talk about a running back that could be as special as Josh Jacobs. Man, pull the trigger because we saw what Josh Jacobs was going to do to this offense. At his floor, to me, that's what Ashton Jeanty is. He is Josh Jacobs. He is a workhorse running back that can catch the ball out the backfield. He has start quickness and burst. He has all of those things. He has the rugged nature to be able to carry the load and run it relentlessly between the tackles. To me, he is RB1. And if the Raiders are sitting there at 6 and they don't have another thing in mind, man, pull the trigger, hand in the car, get you a marquee guy.
Yeah, certainly makes some sense on that front. Let's stay on the offensive side of the ball because I think now that you have the quarterback in place, you kind of start to try to envision what the players around him will look like, and whether RB1 is on the roster right now. Obviously, remains to be seen. We've talked about that, but how about the wide receiver spot? Jacoby Myers still around and has been a very productive player. Trey Tucker, maybe starting to find his way after being a 3rd-round pick back in 2023, but there still feels like some room to grow with that group, right? And that has not been a place where we've seen the Raiders work in free agency as of yet. Now, look, there's Cooper Kupp still out there. There's guys that are out there. Not sure if that's going to register on the Raiders' radar at this point, but I feel like that's a place that you're going to have to look probably relatively early on in this year's draft, seeing as how the wide receiver group is maybe not as deep in terms of talent as we've seen in the last 3, 4, 5 years. So when you look at that, is that a place where we could be talking about a guy like Tetairoa McMillan? Like are we in the same conversation with, all right, Jeanty at 6, McMillan at 6, running back or wide receiver? Do we see the value there on the receiver side as well as the running back side?
Here's the tricky thing, right? So much of what we do running up to the draft is talk about in general, right? Generalities of the position group and those things, as opposed to the 1 or 2 special players that could cause you to maybe take an outlier. I would say this about T-Mac. T-Mac is a guy who would be a nice compliment to Brock Bowers. But I think coming in, you understand that Brock Bowers is the steak. You guys are the side dishes, side entrees. The ball is going to 89 early and often. Once he commands double teams, then you guys have to win one-on-one, particularly down in the red zone. To me, he's good enough to be able to do it. And I know there's been some buzz and some Johnny come lately on some of the guys that were great performers in the combine. I'll just say, normally when these things happen, remember what you wrote and what you said about guys very early in the process, because more time than not, your first impression is your right impression. Don't overthink it. Don't complicate it. Like either you like him or you don't, but either way, we're moving on.
Yeah, and look, I think with T-Mac, there's some things that you obviously love. You love his frame. You love his contested catch ability. You love, how physical and like the dude can turn into an absolute monster, with the ball in his hands, stiff armed. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
kind of feels like a Bowers type player with the
Yes.
ball in his hands.
Mm-hmm.
But and I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, let's not make a mistake. As of right now, Brock Bowers is pass catcher one. Okay, in the offense, like that's you don't have to put wide receiver, tight end on it. He is pass catcher one, in addition to all the other things he can do for this Raiders offense moving forward. But as we continue to look at some of the draft prospects, McMillan has been kind of the consensus number one. I think there's some things that
Mm-hmm.
kind of give me pause. I think the way that he drives off the ball is not as explosive as you would expect for a player with that kind of athletic profile.
True.
I think there is some refinement that could be used
Mm-hmm.
in the route department, the route technique department. And maybe that's just me, as a former receiver,
Oh
speaking
yeah,
about a guy
I see
who
it. Yeah, I see it. I
who,
see
who,
it.
who had to be way up there on route technique to
Mm.
even find an ounce of separation
Yeah.
because of the lack of an athletic profile. So maybe grading a little hard on that scale.
No,
But
but look, there's something
when you're
to
talking
that.
about 6, I think that comes into play.
And just so everyone understands, and look, you're right to talk about it like that
Yeah,
because that should be the standard. The standard should be high for a top 10 pick. And
right.
Dave Gettleman said this, and this comes directly from the way most executives
Yeah,
feel. When we're talking about the top 5, that is reserved for guys that you can squint and envision them wearing a gold jacket. That's
that's
how
right.
special that place should be. We're talking about sacred ground. So at 6, just knocking on the doorstep, this dude has to be someone that you can squint and envision him being an elite player time and time again, perennial Pro Bowl
Yeah,
player, a guy that we talk about on all pro lists. And if your conviction isn't that strong, you have to speak up and say, hey, man, here's where he loses me. I don't see the
yeah,
route running. I don't see the explosiveness. I see the numbers, but I don't see I don't feel his dominance on tape.
yeah.
Well, if that's how you feel, then now you can't take him number 6. And it'll be interesting as we get closer to the draft and move away from like what I call the mock draft season. It'll be interesting to hear what those conversations are really like
Yeah.
when it's now time to pull the trigger, as opposed to speculating like we're all doing a couple months away from
Yeah.
the draft.
That's the fun of it. That's why we love this time of year in draft season or mock draft season. Let's look beyond T-Mac in the receiver group and your top 5 positional rankings out on NFL.com, where you kind of get a picture of the position. And I kind of view it, there's a cluster of guys that are maybe in consideration to be the next one.
Yeah.
Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State,
Mm-hmm.
excellent professional. Like, he is a professional
Yes.
already, and it kind of has been, right? Matthew Golden kind of stole our hearts with the fast
Yes.
40 time, right, at the combine, and really is an ascending player based off what we saw from him on tape at Texas. And then there's Luther Burden from Missouri, who came in,
Mm-hmm.
with high expectations as a potential wide receiver 1 or 2 in this class coming into the season. Didn't have the production. I think you can attribute that to a number of factors: quarterback, offense, whatever you
Yeah.
want to call it. Burden maybe a little bit banged up too, but he ran a nice time for himself at the combine. How do you view that cluster of players, Golden, Egbuka, and Burden, as the next group off the board?
Yeah, it's really interesting, man, because I think styles are everything and what it is that you're lacking. Matthew Golden
Yeah,
may have helped himself more than anybody else at the combine. This is
right.
someone that I had as like he was the first one out of the top 5 list. Well, now he's not only in, but he's in the mix because combination of speed, explosiveness, big playability on splash, like just splash plays. The way he wiggles and makes it happen when he catches the ball on crosses, he's terrific. But you talk about Egbuka and the Ohio State standout to me has been kind of the bill of the ball for most of the process. We always talked about Ohio State and the class, and he is one of those guys that can make it happen. He's smooth, he's subtle in terms of like the little maneuvers that he uses to get open, but a really good player. And then finally, Luther Burden to me is a different type player. I put Luther Burden in the Debo Samuel bucket. His job is to get open,
That's a
get him
good
the
one.
ball, and let it happen. The magic happens for him when he hits it tucked in his right arm, and he's a catch and run specialist. Depending on what you need and how much currency you're willing to give up, look, man, this draft has everything that you want at wide receiver. It just may not be the number of first rounders that we're used to seeing because all these guys kind
Right.
of fall in that 25 to 40 category. A lot of them.
Yeah, yeah, and look, I think all three of those guys have a real opportunity to go in the first 32 picks, which means the next time the Raiders come up on the board, you could be looking at players like Trey Harris from Ole Miss, Jack Besh from TCU, Alec Manor from Stanford, Jaden Higgins, Iowa State. Like we'll get into some of those names as well when we come back to you on the next episode of the Raiders NFL Draft Podcast. Also, want to keep that cluster buster theme going because there's a bunch of those that we can really dig into to give us a better picture of certain position groups, offensive linemen. We'll get into the D tackles and the edge rusher group that might be available the next time that the Raiders come up beyond pick number 6. So we'll dig into all of that next time we come back here to you. I know you guys are going to be consuming a lot of the great Silver and Black Productions team content all over the free agent signings and the new guys coming into the building there in Las Vegas. So a lot of excitement surrounding the Raiders. For Bucky Brooks, I am Rhett Lewis. Thanks for being here with us on the Raiders NFL Draft Podcast, and we'll come back to you next week with another episode.